My name is Önder Ceylan. I'm happy to be here with you today, and I'm going to talk about mobile platform guidelines with progressive web apps. At the end of this talk, we will be able to build a progressive web app based on technologies like Angular and Firebase, and we will optimize our progressive web app for Android and iOS platforms, and we will make sure our progressive web app will be packaged on Microsoft Store as well. A small introduction of myself. I'm based in Amsterdam. I work as JavaScript squad lead at a company called LINKIT. It's a consulting company in Netherlands. And I'm working for KLM as a software technical lead via LINKIT. And I help local organizations like ITNEXT and GDG-NL by co-organizing web and JavaScript related meetups and speaking at them. And I like sharing knowledge about JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular, Ionic, and progressive web apps. This is my Twitter handle. I would like to start with the state of the progressive web app development. How many of you know what progressive web app is? I think a small intro will be better. Progressive web app is an umbrella term which utilizes already existing web APIs. And by using these web APIs and building progressive web app, we are actually building native-like experiences on desktop and mobile devices. So it looks and feels like native application, both on desktop and mobile. And it can access to devices hardware via new APIs like File System API or Badge API. So the goal is building a native-like experience using web technologies. This is an analysis from Thomas Steiner. He works for Google, and he did this analysis by scraping HTTP archive to come up with unique PWA numbers. By 2018 June, there are more than 6,000 unique PWAs on the web. And this graph shows average PWA scores for those PWAs, and it's about 84 out of 100. This is a score based on Lighthouse. I will talk about Lighthouse in later slides. And you can visit these blog posts from Thomas to see more about the analysis. And more APIs are being developed by Google as part of Project Fugu. Project Fugu is a special project started by Google itself. And this graph shows tentative launches for in-flight APIs scheduled for 2019. Some of these APIs already delivered, so you can actually start using them on Chrome browser, on Android. And this is a slide from Going Big, PWAs Come to Desktop and Chrome OS from Google I/O 2019. And there's a link for the talk itself as well. And this link also shows the progress of these APIs. So you can visit this link. This is a live documentation. It shows the current status of in-progress APIs as part of Project Fugu. And more, Project Fugu is part of Capabilities project. You can visit this link to see all the capabilities in flight. And these capabilities are actually for closing the gap between native applications and PWAs. So all these APIs are being built to provide the functionality that web APIs cannot provide so far. And by adding this functionality like web share target API, shape detection API, wake lock, badging API, these are already developed APIs. You can even visit this code lab. This is also on this link and start using them today. I would like to base my talk based on Angular and Firebase technologies because of simplicity. And it all starts by adding a PWA schematic to an Angular app when you want to build a progressive web app based on Angular. And schematic is a technology that you use with Angular for code scaffolding. Starting from a typical web application, you can run this command ng add Angular PWA. This is a schematic, and this will help you to start off your PWA journey on your Angular project. By running this, by the way, this is my friend Doggy. So he will show up today, time to time, to share some tips with us. First tip is using npx ng command in your Angular project to not conflict with your system dependencies and project dependencies. And there's a whole blog post about NPX here. By running this PWA schematic, you actually get these files created for your project. The first file is Angular Service Worker config.json file. This is a very important file that we configure all functionality about our progressive web app in Angular ecosystem. And it creates some default icons for our progressive web app. And it creates a manifest.json file. I will talk about manifest.json file now. So manifest.json file is a standard file which helps your progressive web app to behave on multiple devices. So you, by providing name, theme color, how it will be launched, you're actually declaring how your progressive web app will behave on different platforms. It's a web standard. And this is how it looks in general. It has fields like name, short name, theme color, background color, display, scope, and the start URL, and some icons. And you can inspect this manifest file by going to your DevTools tab and then application and then manifest. And it shows the recognized fields about this manifest.json file. One thing we need to improve in the manifest.json file that is created by Angular is adding this description field. It's not created by default by Angular, but it is a standard. It's documented on W3C and also MDN. Not only that, it is required for Microsoft Store to package it automatically in their store. So if you provide a name, description, an app icon that is at least 512 times 512 pixels, then you make sure that your progressive web will be automatically indexed by Microsoft in their store. You don't need to do anything about it. Another improvement in the manifest.json file is adding a start URL. By adding a query parameter here, you make sure that you can track how many of your users are actually launching your progressive web app from the home screen itself. An important user engagement about progressive web apps is adding it to home screen. And we are going to talk about how to help users to add them, add your PWA to their home screen. Android actually adds your progressive web app, displays this prompt for your users to add your progressive web app to their home screen automatically if you meet with at the home screen criteria. And if you meet it, based on Chrome version, it can show a banner, a mini info bar, or dialog even. And this criteria is your application shouldn't be already installed on the device. It should meet a user engagement heuristic, and current heuristic is like 30 seconds of user engagement on your progressive web app. And it should include a web app manifest file that includes short name or name. Icons must include at least 192 pixels and 512 pixel size icons. It should have a start URL, and display must be one of full screen standalone or minimal UI. It must be served over HTTPS. And it should have a registered service worker with a fetch event handler. We will talk about service workers later on. And by using Angular and Firebase stack, we kind of make sure that we already satisfied with these requirements. We cannot do anything about the user engagement heuristic other than providing good experiences for our users. So by using Angular and Firebase, you kind of make sure that these add to home screen prompts on Android will show up automatically. Keep in mind, short name field in your manifest JSON file will be your progressive web app's name when you add it to home screen. Adding to a home screen is basically installing progressive web app. There is no installation for progressive web apps, it's just a shortcut. But by tapping this icon add to home screen, you're actually installing it. It's just a shortcut. And the name field will be displayed on add to home screen prompt on Android. Unfortunately, there is no functionality like this on iOS. So we need to build a similar UI by ourselves on iOS. That kind of sucks, but it is what it is. It can be a good old prompt like this, or it can be a mini info bar like this to provide a uniform experience across platforms. So this is an example code that mimics this mini info bar functionality. It checks if your progressive web is running on iOS. Then it checks if it's in standalone mode. We don't want to show this again and again if it's already added to home screen. And We only want to show these once because we don't want to annoy our users by showing this again and again also. And eventually, based on these functions, we display a toast message or whatever UI you're using on your app. And this is how it looks after you implement this code. It shows this message to user, and it actually points to this icon. It's a share button, and when you click it, there will be add to home screen option. We need to add some meta tags for platform optimization, especially on iOS. Although many of the browsers, they recognize web app manifest specs, the implementation of web app manifest on WebKit, especially on mobile Safari, is quite poor. So the icons you put on manifest, the theme color you provide in manifest, those are not recognized on iOS. In order to declare this functionality and look and feel, we need to put some meta tags. Because of this, Apple even doesn't create a splash screen for you, so we need to create also meta tags for the splash screen. So this is documented on Safari Web Content Guide. This is quite old documentation, and it's also poorly documented, but I will tell you more about how these meta tags are being used. But don't forget, you need to keep an eye on WebKit feature status for tracking the progress of the standards, because we don't want to stay in the non-standard track of iOS. And once web app manifest specs are fully implemented on iOS, we don't need to put these meta tags on our index.html anymore. And you can keep track of the progress by visiting WebKit status page, and you can search for basically any API, and you will see the status of those APIs in WebKit. Currently, web app manifest is in development stage. We don't know when it will be delivered, and we don't know how it will be using icons or splash screens on iOS. It's unknown. But for now, the only way for us to provide icons, for instance, by adding these meta tags in your index.html. So you need to provide this rel Apple Touch icon, and then a link for your icon image. And this demonstrates an application, PWA, without an icon. So it just takes a snapshot of your page. It doesn't show any icon. And when you implement these meta tags, you have nice icon like this. And it's more like a native experience on the system. And for the splash screens, there's another tag. It's with rel Apple Touch startup image and launch. This is how it's documented on Safari Web Content Guide, but actually there are a lot more details in it, such as you need to provide a media tag here, providing a device width, and then scale factor for the device, and also orientation. And this demonstrates the devices list on human interface guidelines of iOS. And not so good news, you need to create these meta tags for each of these portrait sizes, landscape sizes, and orientations, and scale factors. But Doggy is here to help. It advises us to use an automated tool to generate all these images and the meta tags coming with it. You can visit this link. This is actually an open source CLI tool that I recently published 2 months ago. What it does is basically this. You run a command, and it generates all the splash screens, all the icons required for you. It updates index.html by putting the meta tag here automatically if you provide the index.html path. And it also updates your manifest.json file by putting the icons in it. So you automate the generation of your all icons and splash screens, targeting all the platforms at once. Check this out. It's nice. And this demonstrates how your splash screen is actually working on the device of iOS. For Android, you don't need to do anything for the splash screen other than providing an icon in your manifest.json file. Android will create splash screen automatically based on the icon that you provide in manifest.json. But for iOS, it's a complicated story. You need to provide these meta tags and each of these images. And adding further meta tags for the status bar, there's another meta tag called Apple Mobile Web App Status Bar Style. And it comes in 3 shapes, white, black, and black translucent. It only provides these 3 options and no further customization, unfortunately. And black translucent is basically transparent with white text on it, and white comes with white background and black text on it, and black is black background and white text on it. So when you add PWA, Angular PWA schematic, Angular Service Worker module is injected in your Angular application to your app module TS file. And this module registers an automatically generated service worker file, which is called Angular Service Worker-worker.js. And it's built by Angular CLI when you build for production. You configure this Angular Service Worker based on this Angular Service Worker config JSON file. And it's actually, by the definition you put in this JSON file, it knows how to cache your assets, how to provide it via your service workers from your cache, and provide an instant experience on the device, even if your device is offline. Angular Service Worker introduces asset groups. Assets are resources that are part of the app version that update along with the app. They can include resources loaded from your server or from CDN as well. An install mode determines how the assets are going to be fetched during the install. An update mode determines how your files, your assets are going to be fetched during the update of your progressive web app. And by using this structure, Angular Service Worker architecture makes sure that your users can have both versions of your app when there's an update. By caching, the resources that are coming from the old version of your app will be still existing on your progressive app until your service worker is replaced. I will talk more about how the service worker updates comes in picture and PWA updates come in picture. But first, I want to talk about this prefetch and lazy fields. Prefetch is like how the word explains. It prefetches all the assets at once. So every single resources listed in this definition will be fetched automatically. Keep in mind, this can be bandwidth intensive. So if you match, let's say, hundreds of files with this definition, all of them will be fetched during the install. So it can be bandwidth intensive if you're not careful. And there's lazy mode. Lazy mode is only fetching the resources when it's requested. So you can actually nicely ask this doggy to fetch it rather than throwing the frisbee on it. And this is an example asset group configuration for an architecture on PWAs called app shells. So app shells is a pattern providing the main layout, core layout for your progressive web app. By providing a core layout for your application, you make sure that you provide an instant application opening application experience for your progressive web app, because the files listed here will be fetched automatically on installation step of your progressive web app. So when you open it for the first time, you don't need to fetch this content again, and you make sure that your users have the main layout of the progressive web app loaded. It's better to keep it with prefetch because we want to cache these assets in front. And there's another asset group configuration in this context is UI assets. UI assets like images of your UI, additional images, some icons, and even fonts from CDN. So you can install all those files with the lazy approach. So once it's requested for the first time, it will be fetched and cached. And for the second or further loss, it will be loaded from the cache itself. When you use a caching strategy, you must exclude the resources that you would like to keep fresh, such as additional service worker files that your app might use. So I will talk about these additional service worker files in a minute. Extending an Angular service worker is not possible currently. So you're kind of stuck how Angular is providing you the architecture of how it works with Angular service workers. So you cannot build your own service worker implementation on top of Angulars. But there is a workaround, and I think it's crucial to know that because of the flexibility you can get by implementing your own service worker code, and also for further functionality like push notifications that you might put on your progressive web app. So this is how you can actually provide this extension. You can create a new service worker in your application. Let's call it main-service worker.js file. And what it does is it's a wrapper for loading additional service worker. So this is the service worker generated by Angular when you build for production. And this loads that service worker. This can be your own service worker implementation for messaging in your application, for instance. And if you want push notifications in your app, there's another service worker, notification service worker, that is also loaded by main-sw.js file. But when you do this, you also need to change your app module TS file to register this new wrapper service worker rather than this one. So this is the default value actually for this field. By introducing this abstraction, we should change this to main service worker, and it's only enabled for production. And when you use service workers, this is the panel that you can inspect on DevTools. You go to Application tab and then Service Worker, and there you can see service workers attached to your application. For instance, main SW here is attached, and also Firebase messaging to SW is attached. Updating your PWA is basically, especially in Angular context, is basically changing any of your files, any of the bits of your files. But when we talk about native service workers, usually the flow is like this. Browser checks for an update for a service worker byte difference. It automatically handles this. And if there is a new service worker, then update is available. And then it's up to you to show a notification. You can show a notification to users to let them update the progressive web app immediately, or you can wait for your users to close all the tabs attached to the old service worker. So once all the tabs attached to the old service worker is closed, then the new service worker will automatically replace the old one, and all new clients will be attached to this new service worker. And you can actually speed up these by providing a UI, a prompt, to automatically refresh your tab. This is how Angular actually creates a manifest output for your build. So it summarizes the total build of your progressive web app. It has all the icons. It has all the data groups that are defined in your Angular service worker configuration. It has the hash table for all the files. So it means if you change even one of these files, it will have a new MD5 hash, and then it explains that this is a new build. And that's how you actually recognize there's a new build, there's an update for your progressive web app. You can find this file in your build output when you build for production. An additional context in Angular Service Worker config JSON file is app data. App data lets you to provide any sort of custom data you want. For instance, in this update context, we are using app data to provide version information and also change log. And then you can actually access to this data when there's a new service worker update. So service worker update is a service that you can inject in your app component. And then you can subscribe to service worker update available, observable. Then you can actually utilize those app data to show a prompt like this. You can even display that version and change log in this message. And then it's up to your users to refresh it immediately or cancel it. If they cancel it, once the application is closed on the device, or if it's a desktop, if you close all the tabs attached to service worker, it will be refreshed. Configuring Angular JSON for static assets is also quite important. This is the default asset configuration coming from your Angular PWA schematic. It adds these manifest JSON addition to the assets. And when you do such extension of service worker, you also need to tweak your build system in your Angular JSON by making sure you're actually copying the service workers and all the service workers in that folder to the root of your build output. And if any of your service worker implementation uses additional libraries, for instance, I used IndexedDB key value package in one of my PWAs, and I also need to make sure that this is copied to build output. Angular's config files use glob-like patterns to match file names. You can use these to match files in all folders matching with the HTML extension, or this one on the root, and you can also exclude any of the files. Firebase is built around simplicity. That's why I'm going to talk about deploying your application to Firebase today. And hosting your progressive web app on Firebase is quite easy. You can log into your Firebase console and create a new project, and then navigate to hosting tab, and then you will get the setup hosting instructions over the Firebase CLI. So you need to use Firebase CLI to set up your project. So this is how you install Firebase, or if you don't want to install it globally, you can use npx for one-off usage. And then when you call Firebase init, it asks you which services you want to use. In our context, we are going to only use hosting configuration. And when you use the hosting configuration, it creates two files for us. Firebase JSON for the configuration of your hosting, and some other services as well. And Firebase RC for the configuration of your credentials. Configuring a Firebase hosting for your progressive web app is crucial. For instance, we need to define our build output of your Angular app in this hosting configuration. So we need to point it to a public folder. And then we need to ignore some files that are in our project. And we also need to provide this rewrite rule, which is actually a requirement for any sort of web server that is using single-page applications. Since our progressive web app is a single-page application as well, we need to rewrite all the URLs to index.html. A very important security tip from Doggy: do not deploy any file that can keep your credentials or any other confidential info under no circumstances. Make sure to ignore any configuration file you have in your public folder. Otherwise, you can end up tweets like this. So this shows the environment files that are listed on Google. Any key secrets can be found like with a simple search like this. And using Firebase provides us adding a custom HTTP header, and we will make use these custom HTTP headers by providing long time caching for our assets. Because the way Angular's build system is structured, it actually puts the MD5 hash name in the file name. That means we can actually cache it forever. Because every new change that in that file will be creating a new file name for us. And you can do that by providing the header cache control, maximum age 1 year. And then you also provide gzip content encoding for your all JavaScript and CSS files. Normally, when you build for any other system, you need to actually care about cache invalidation when you provide long-time caching. But since we are using Angular's build system, we guarantee that every new file has a new name, hence it will be refreshed from the browser. Another tip from my friend, introducing vendor chunks to your production build config is a really nice option. This will help your progressive web apps cache strategy, as you mostly not going to update vendor libraries too often. By enabling this option, you guarantee that your vendor library is actually an additional file, and then every time you add up new features to your progressive web app, only few of these files will be changed, and you will have longer time of cache with vendor libraries, which is actually consuming the more amount of bytes from your app. Deploying your progressive web app to Firebase is quite simple. You just call Firebase deploy, and based on the configuration in your Firebase JSON file, it deploys your application to the URL that you specify. And this is not so months ago, this is a new addition in the schematic world. You can actually use this Angular Fire schematic to use Firebase commands in your Angular project. So you don't need to use Firebase CLI. You can actually make use of this schematic by running this, for instance, ng-run my app deploy command. You make sure that you're going to deploy your Angular project from the CLI itself. Auditing your PWA with Lighthouse is the last step you need to do on your progressive web app. Lighthouse is an open source library provided by Google. It comes in 3 shapes. One of them is online runner. So you can just visit this URL and run audits on any type of web page. And you can use Chrome DevTools. And by using Chrome DevTools, you choose what types of audits you want to do in the audit panel. And then it will show the amount of audits that is run for your application. And it shows what to improve in your application in terms of accessibility, performance, progressive web app. And there's also CLI. By using this CLI command, you create this nice HTML report. And another tip from my friend, you can execute nightly regressions on your production app to monitor it against updated progressive web app audits. Will help you to align some further implementations of PWA audits, because new audits are implemented quite often in Lighthouse CLI. So by introducing such CLI, you kind of guarantee in your build pipeline that you're meeting the latest standards of progressive web apps. And if you're curious about more information on progressive web app, I will host a workshop for exactly the same content of this. So we are going to build a progressive web app. We are actually transform an Angular and Ionic application into a progressive web app by applying all these principles in 1 hour and 45 minutes in the afternoon. Please join me if you like. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. We actually have a few questions in Slido, but you can as well ask your questions by just raising your hand and asking. So yeah, let's start with the Slido questions and then we can follow it up. Yeah, cool. So the first question is, will Apple and Google really embrace PWAs, given that they bypass their stores and quality gates?
I cannot really tell much about Apple. For Apple, I think it kind of conflicts with their business strategies. That's my opinion. For Google, it is not. Google actually allows you to add progressive web apps in your Google Play Store. So there is a technology called Web APK. So you can actually package your progressive web app for Play Store. And there's TWA, Trusted Web Activities. By using these technologies, you can actually create APK files based on progressive web app. And if you want to add more functionality, like native functionality that web APIs cannot provide for now, you can also do this extension with TWA.
Cool, thank you. The next question is there an API for displaying custom installation prompt for your PWA?
Yes, so you can use actually Service Worker API to interrupt the default prompt that is used on Android system. You can interrupt this event and use the event for displaying your own UI whenever you want. So you don't need to display add to home screen immediately. You can wait for your user to interact with your domain for some time. And once you're confident with using this engagement, you can actually use that event that you're saved from Service Worker and display your own UI. But for iOS, there is no implementation for that yet.
Cool, thank you. And the next question, can we link somehow our PWAs to Google Play or App Store? You kind of already answered that.
Like intent links, what type of link?
It just says, can we link our PWA to one of the stores?
I'm not sure if I get it completely.
Yeah, maybe the person who asked that can clarify the question, yeah?
Okay, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions, anyone?
So it's not a comparison of apples and apples, in my opinion. So it doesn't guarantee that it will provide all the native functionality you get from native platforms. But it's more about making app development more accessible without any installation hassle. So doesn't necessarily replace how you build native applications via Flutter or any JavaScript to native solution. But it's more like making the development cycle easier and faster for your application and making it more accessible via web itself. Because progressive web apps are just web applications, so you can actually, in Google search results, you can have a link for your progressive web app. Once you click on it, so it works like an intent link on your device, it can just show up an app instead of a web page. It is relatively easier because it has this schematic and it has its own abstraction of how service workers are implemented. And it's designed for the simplicity. That's why it doesn't provide you a lot more cache options that you can get actually from some other libraries. But if this is not only the way that you can build a progressive web app. If you're using vanilla JS code or any other stack, you can make use of your own implementation, native service worker implementation. But it means you need to put a lot of boilerplate code. Like for instance, for the freshness on install mode caching strategy, you need to put like maybe 100 or 200 number of lines on your service worker to deal with fetch events, to deal with cache storage of your browser, to interrupt all the requests, to decide where to pick the data first. Is it network first or is it cache first? So these are all complex implementations. But there are libraries like Workbox. Workbox is also an open source library from Google, and it simplifies service worker implementation, and it comes with all these caching strategies as well. By just simple one-line implementation, you make sure that you have same sort of caching strategy, and you can use it with any stack. Yep. Yeah. So please check Project Fugu. Project Fugu's APIs are actually designed for this purpose. So it has, for instance, contact picker API, which allows you to pick a contact from your device, and you're in full control how these permissions are managed on your device. You can pick, you can select the contacts that you want to share with the API, and you can also select which fields that you want to share with the contact picker API. APIs like this, for instance, file system API, badging API, those make sure that you have device hardware accessibility via web APIs. Currently, it is driven by Google, so it works nice on the Android devices, but Safari is following behind. They implement, as part of WebKit, some of these APIs as well, but not as fast as Google. So there are still some time to catch up for all platforms. Sure. I think that, yeah. I personally didn't build any application using trusted web activities, but it's a way that you can run kind of a web view within your Android application. And then it's eventually packaged as APK as far as I know. And as far as I know, it's also possible to introduce your own functionality on top of just displaying a web view as a progressive web. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for your attention.